I had stopped listening for my wolf a long time ago. Not deliberately, not with any ceremony or decision. It was simply that 4 centuries of silence teach a man to stop turning toward a sound that never comes. My wolf was there, I could feel the weight of it. The old mass of the thing settled somewhere beneath my ribs like a stone sunk deep in still water. But it did not speak. It had not spoken since the year Velroth was young, and the pine ridges beyond the eastern wall still had names I invented myself. The court had stopped asking. My counsel had stopped hinting. Even the old texts, which were thorough on the subject of alphas and their bonds, had nothing useful to say about a wolf that simply went quiet and stayed that way. So I ruled. That was the answer to most things that had no better answer. I ruled, and the kingdom ran, and the wolves in my yard were healthy and loud and chose no one in particular, which suited the court's sense of orderliness. The mate mark on my left wrist, the patch of skin where the bond would burn if it ever recognized someone, had been blank so long that I sometimes forgot it was meant for anything at all. A birthmark, almost. A pale record of a promise the world had apparently decided not to keep. My counsel brought women before me in the orderly way counsels do. Alliance matches, they called them, which was the polite word for politics dressed in ceremony. A daughter from Kale's Ridge in the autumn, a widow of standing from the Western Territories in the spring, capable women, dignified, who looked at me with the careful eyes of people entering a negotiation. I treated them with the respect they deserved and sent them home with my honest regrets. My wolf did not stir. My wrist stayed pale. There was nothing to be done about it. The girl from the snow was not an alliance match. She arrived in the 3rd week of the hard frost. One of my gate wardens brought her in from the eastern approach at dusk, when the temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that turns the breath to something solid and fogs the lanterns on the wall. He told me afterward that she had been walking. Not riding, not in a carriage, not with a party. Walking alone along the ridgeline path with a pack on her back and a worn traveling cloak that was not quite sufficient for the weather, and she had not asked to be brought in. He had insisted, he said, because she had set a broken leg on one of his patrol wolves without being asked, using a straight stick and strips torn from the hem of her cloak, and the wolf had gone calm under her hands in the way wolves go calm for almost no one. I was told this while reviewing the Eastern Boundary reports. I filed it in the same part of my mind where I kept all small, unremarkable things. A wandering healer, apparently. We gave wandering healers the small room off the east corridor, a warm room with a good hearth and a window that looked onto the yard. I sent word to have it prepared and went back to my boundary reports. That was the first night. On the second morning, one of the yard wolves followed her. I saw it from the corridor window, not intending to, simply passing. She had gone out into the yard at first light, which was early and very cold, and she was standing at the eastern fence looking at the pine ridge with the focused attention of someone who has nothing particular to do and is making the most of it. The yard wolf Bren, we called him, a big gray with a scarred left shoulder who had been with us 11 years and was famously indifferent to people, had crossed the yard from his place near the south gate and was standing beside her. Not behind her, beside her, his shoulder at her knee. She did not reach down to pet him. She simply stood with him the way you stand beside someone you have known a long time, both of you looking at the same view. I stood at the corridor window longer than the boundary reports required, and then I went about my day. Her name was Senna. I learned this from the gate warden's brief report, which also noted that she had given no family name, no pack name, no territory of origin. Just Senna, which was either a first name or the only name she used, and the warden had not pressed because she had fixed his patrol wolf's leg, and the wolf was walking cleanly this morning for the first time in 2 weeks. She was a healer. She was not young in the way the alliance candidates tended to be young. She was perhaps 30, perhaps 35, with the kind of steadiness in her bearing that comes from years of working alone in places that were not always safe. She had arrived with very little and had not asked for more than the room and the warmth. My counsel did not know quite what to make of her. "She has no standing," said Vareth, my first counselor, on the third day, as though standing were the variable I most needed to optimize for in a healer. "No pack name, no recorded lineage, no letters of introduction. We don't know where she came from. We know she can set a broken leg in the dark in freezing temperatures," I said, "and that Bren has not left her side in 2 days. Vareth looked at me with the expression he used when he thought I was being deliberately obtuse. "Bren is a yard wolf. He follows interesting smells. Bren has never followed anyone in 11 years. There is always a first time." He moved on to the boundary reports, which was his way of ending topics he found inconvenient. I did not argue, but I went to the yard that afternoon, and Bren was indeed still with her, and now there were 2 others. A young female named Reth, barely 2 years old and usually occupied with the younger wardens who fed her by hand, and an older male I called Dustcoat for the color of his winter coat, who was famously difficult and had bitten 3 counselors in his time, and was generally given a wide berth by everyone with any sense. All 3 were in the yard with Senna, who was doing nothing more remarkable than mending something. A piece of leather harness. It looked like sitting on the low stone wall by the eastern fence in the cold light, with her hands moving steadily, and the wolves arranged around her as though they had been placed there by someone who knew what a good composition looked like. She looked up when I came into the yard. Her eyes were a clear, pale brown, the color of shallow stream water over sand, and they held the same quality her bearing held, no performance in them, no particular effort to impress or conceal. "My lord," she said, "the way you say it when you mean it as a greeting and nothing else." "You are mending my harness," I said. "It was on the fence post with a broken buckle. I hope you don't mind." I did not mind. I sat on the wall 2 feet from her and watched the yard for a while, which was not something I generally did in the afternoons. Dustcoat put his great gray head on my knee after a moment, which was also not something he generally did, and I looked at him with the mild surprise of a man who has been surprised by something small and can't account for it. "He doesn't usually do that," I said. "He's been doing it all morning," Senna said, not looking up from the buckle. "I think he likes warmth. He bit Vareth 3 years ago." "He bit me on the wrist when I sat down," she said. "I didn't react. He hasn't bitten me since." She considered the buckle. "I think he tests people to see if they'll make a fuss." I thought about Vareth, who had made an enormous fuss. "That seems like him," I said. We sat for a while. The cold was sharp and clean. The pine ridge beyond the eastern fence caught the low winter sun and held it for a few minutes before letting it go. "You've been here 4 days," I said, "and you haven't asked for anything." "I have everything I need. Most people who come to Velroth want something from it." She looked up at that, not defensively, just directly, as though she was willing to address the thing directly. "I needed to be out of the cold," she said. "I'm out of the cold. I'm grateful." She went back to the buckle. "I'll move on when the weather lifts, if that's what you're asking." I wasn't asking that. She nodded once, accepting this, and did not push it further. I stayed in the yard until the light failed and the cold became the kind of cold you don't argue with. And then I went inside and sat in my study for an hour, trying to remember the last time. I had sat on a wall in the afternoon doing nothing in particular. I could not remember it. By the end of the first week, 5 wolves had attached themselves to her with the steady, undeniable logic of wolves who have made a decision and see no reason to revisit it. Bren remained the constant. He slept across her doorway every night, which the wardens found both charming and logistically inconvenient, since the east corridor was not built for a wolf the size of Bren to be a permanent fixture in it. Reth and Dustcoat came and went freely. 2 others, a bonded pair, a tawny male and a dark female who had always moved as a unit and had never shown particular interest in any person. had begun appearing in the yard when Senna was in the yard, departing when she went inside with the quiet precision of animals who have organized their schedules around something important. The pack had not behaved this way in my memory, which was a long memory. They were friendly enough with the wardens who fed and worked with them. They had preferences and affinities the way all animals do. But this was not preference. This was choosing. I said nothing to my counsel about it, because I had learned over 4 centuries that the most reliable way to get Vareth to dismiss something was to draw his attention to it. Instead, I watched. She was not trying to enchant them. That was the first thing I established to my own satisfaction, watching her in the yard through 3 mornings in a row. She did not carry food for them, I checked with the kitchen. She did not make particular sounds, or spend time crouching at their level, or do any of the things a person who was deliberately attempting to cultivate wolves would do. She simply went about what she was going about, mending things, taking long, slow walks along the fence line, sitting in the cold with her hands folded and her face turned toward whatever the light was doing. And the wolves organized themselves around her with the matter-of-fact certainty of animals who know where the center of gravity is and have decided to stand near it. On the 5th morning, I found her in the eastern yard before dawn, which was before even the wardens were reliably in position. She was not doing anything. She was sitting on the frozen ground, not on the wall, on the ground, with her back against the fence post, and her knees drawn up and Bren's head in her lap, and she was looking at the sky in the way you look at something you are fond of without needing to say so. The temperature was savage. Her breath made small, clean clouds in the dark. I should have gone back inside. Instead, I crossed the yard and sat against the fence 4 feet away. She did not startle. She glanced at me with the equanimity of someone who has learned that being startled rarely improves a situation, and then looked back at the sky. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." "I don't sleep well in strange houses." A pause. "I don't mean that as a complaint." "I know." I looked at the sky too, which was the color of dark water just before light finds it. "I don't sleep well either. I haven't in a long time." "How long?" I considered whether to answer honestly. "About 400 years," I said. She didn't react to the number the way people usually reacted, with a careful adjustment of expression, with the recalibration that happened when the full weight of 4 centuries landed on a conversation. She just said, "That's a long time to be tired," in a tone that was neither sympathetic nor dismissive, simply observational, as though she had filed it and was content to leave it there. "It is," I said. Bren exhaled in his sleep, a long, slow breath that made his whole body shift. Senna moved her hand, not petting him exactly, more the way you rest your hand on something solid to remind yourself it's there. "They've never done this," I said, meaning the wolves. "Not in all the years I can account for. They don't choose people." "I know," she said. "I can feel them choosing, a beat. I don't know what to do about it." "Neither do I said. We sat until the light came. I could not have told you afterward what we talked about, or whether we talked about anything else at all. Only that when I went inside, the stone floor of the east corridor seemed warmer than it had been, and the study felt less airless than usual, and I sat at my desk for a full hour before I realized I was not reading the report in front of me but thinking about pale brown eyes and a woman who had said, "That's a long time to be tired," as though it were a small, manageable thing, and not the burden I had been carrying alone for as long as I could remember. My wolf moved. Not dramatically. Not the surge I had read about in the old texts, the howl that splits through you and makes your vision gold. Just a shift, the stone beneath the ribs settling into a slightly different position. A weight that had been still so long that stillness had seemed its nature rearranging itself, slowly, like a sleeper turning over. I sat very still and said nothing aloud. There was no one to say anything to. I just sat there in the early morning of my 400-year-old study and felt the thing that had not moved in all of that time move and tried to understand what it meant. I was not ready to understand what it meant. My council convened the formal session on the 11th day. The timing was Vareth's, it always was. He had a gift for selecting the moment when he felt I was most likely to be compliant, and the 11th day had the particular quality of a moment he had been engineering since the first frost. 2 senior lords from the Eastern Territories had ridden in for the boundary discussions. 3 ranking families from the northern settlements had sent their eldest daughters as alliance representatives, and the court was full in the way it was only full in midwinter, when travel was hard enough that those who made the effort expected to be taken seriously. He laid it out for me the evening before, a formal session in the great court. The boundary matters first, then the alliance proposals. 3 candidates, each with good standing, each with documented lineage, each representing a territory Velroth had strategic reason to strengthen its ties with. He had chosen them well, he always did. They were capable women, and I had no serious objection to any of them as people. The court has been patient, Vareth said, in the tone he used when he meant the court has been patient and you should not test it further. 4 centuries, my lord. They understand the difficulty, but the wolf matters, the bond matters, and without evidence that either is, he paused, selecting his word with care. Active, the council must take what steps it can. I understand, I said, which was true. I'll be there. He moved toward the door, then stopped. The healer, he said, with his back still turned. She's been here 11 days. The pack is another pause. Attached to her in a way that's becoming difficult for the wardens to manage. It would be better if she attended the session. Easier to keep track of her. I recognized this for what it was. Vareth wanted her where the court could see her and categorize her correctly, which was to say below the level that warranted attention. A wandering healer in the great court, standing at the back among the minor attendants, was tidier than a wandering healer in the east corridor whose presence was rearranging the wolves. She'll attend, I said. That night, for the first time in what I could not precisely calculate, I dreamed. It was not a remarkable dream, only the yard and the pine ridge and pale brown eyes looking at the sky. But I woke with the feeling that something had been decided, somewhere in the part of me that makes decisions without consulting the rest. The morning of the session, I found her in the yard. The day was clear and hard, the kind of winter morning that makes the world look as though it has been cut from something and has clean edges. She was at the eastern fence, and every wolf in the yard was with her. Not some of them, all of them. Bren at her side. Reth and Duskcoat and the tawny bonded pair and 6 others I counted, wolves who had nothing in common with each other except that they were all looking at the same woman with the same quality of attention. She heard me cross the yard and turned. She was wearing the same traveling cloak she had arrived in, which had been washed and was still not quite right for the weather. She had not acquired a better one. I made a note that this should be addressed, and then was immediately distracted from the note by the fact that all 11 wolves in my yard were standing quietly behind her like a council that had already reached its conclusions. The session is at mid-morning, I said. I know, your warden told me. She looked at the wolves, then back at me. Will it bother your council that they follow me around? I thought of Vareth. Yes, I said honestly, but that's not a reason for them to stop. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but in the direction of one. I wouldn't know how to make them stop. No, I said, I don't think you would. We walked into the great court together. Not because I planned it, I had planned to walk in ahead of her, in the proper manner, with my counsel at my back and the court arrayed for the session. But when I turned from the yard, she turned too, and the wolves came with her as far as the inner door, which was as far as they could come. And then they sat in a row at the threshold and waited with the patience of creatures who have decided this is what they are doing today and do not need it explained. The court noticed. The court always notices when every wolf in the yard abandons its post and organizes itself at the door of the great hall. There was a stillness in the room, not an unfriendly stillness, but the particular quality of collective attention when a large group of people has registered something unexpected and has not yet decided what to do about it. Senna took a place at the back, near the north wall, which was where the minor attendants stood. She was neither shrinking from it nor making anything of it. She simply stood where she was directed and folded her hands and waited. The session began. Varith was efficient, as he always was. The boundary discussions ran for the first hour, agreements, adjustments, minor conflicts resolved through the incremental logic of long-standing law. I attended to all of it with the attention it required. The Eastern Lords were reasonable men, and we reached our conclusions without difficulty. Then the alliance proposals. Varith presented them with the smooth competence of a man who has prepared this moment carefully. 3 candidates, standing at the front of the court in their formal dress, capable, dignified, watching me with the careful eyes of women who understood what was being asked. I looked at each of them in turn and felt precisely what I had felt for 4 centuries of alliance presentations, a respectful appreciation for their quality and a complete absence of anything else. My wolf did not move. My wrist was pale and quiet. I was preparing the careful language of my regrets when my wolf walked. Not the internal wolf, the actual wolf. Bren had pushed the inner door open. The latch was loose. It had needed repair for months. I had not prioritized it, and come into the great court with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of an animal who is going somewhere and sees no reason to announce it. The court went silent. Bren paid no attention to the silence, or to the 3 candidates at the front, or to Varith, who stepped aside with an expression of tremendous suppressed displeasure. Bren crossed the hall in 11 long strides and went to the north wall, where Senna was standing, and sat down beside her and put his massive gray head in her lap. Senna looked down at him with the equanimity she brought to everything. She did not look up at the court. She did not look at me. She put her hand on Bren's head with the same unhurried quality as always and stood there, while the whole court found something to do with its face. And then the wrist. It began as warmth, a warmth I had not felt in so long that I did not recognize it for what it was until it had already become something more than warmth. A slow-building heat in the skin of my left wrist, the place where 4 centuries of blankness had lived, and then something that was not pain exactly but was close enough to pain that I looked down. The mate mark was coming alive. I could see it, a silver-gold light, faint at first, then rising, the pattern of the bond burning itself into the surface of my wrist with the serene indifference of something that has been waiting a very long time and is no longer interested in waiting. I looked up. Across the hall, past the 3 candidates who had gone very still, past Varith whose expression had moved through several stages I could not catalog quickly enough, past the 2 Eastern Lords who were watching with the absorbed attention of men who have just witnessed something historically significant. Senna was looking at me. Not at the wrist, at me. Her face was what it always was, clear still without performance. But there was something else in it now, not fear, not the careful calculation I had seen in others when the bond announced itself. Something quieter, the look of someone who has been walking a long road and has just recognized a landmark they did not know they were looking for. The mate mark finished its work. The court was absolutely silent. I crossed the hall. I was aware, in the way you are aware of peripheral things when the center has claimed all your attention, that the 3 candidates had stepped aside, that Varith was standing very still, that the Eastern Lords had exchanged a glance, that every person in the great court of Velroth was watching the Alpha King walk across his own hall to the woman standing at the back wall beside a wolf who had made his decision 11 days ago. I stopped in front of her. "Senna," I said. "My lord," she said, in the same tone as always, a greeting, nothing more, nothing performed. "My wolf," I said, and did not know how to finish the sentence, because what I wanted to say was my wolf chose you 400 years before I could, which was not the dignified language of a formal court session. So instead I showed her my wrist, where the mate mark was now fully present, silver, gold, and certain, the most definitive thing I had seen in 4 centuries of ruling, and said, "I believe this has been settled for longer than either of us knew." She looked at the mark. She looked at me. Then she turned her left wrist over slowly and showed me the inside of her own wrist, where the same mark was forming, slower and quieter than mine, a mirror of it, the other half of a conversation that had been interrupted so long ago that neither of us had been there for the beginning of it. I had not known it could appear on her as well. The old texts disagreed about this. I made a note to have Vareth update the texts, and then was immediately aware that I was thinking about administrative corrections in what was by any measure not an administrative moment. I started. "Yes," she said. There are things I should say, formally, the court." "You can say them," she said, with the faintest trace of the not-quite smile. "I'll wait." I turned to face the court, which was still entirely silent, and was watching with the collective expression of a group of people who have attended many formal sessions, and have never seen one go quite this way. "The bond has chosen," I said, and my voice in the great court of Velroth was the same voice I had been using for 4 centuries, the same measured weight, the same carried quiet. But it did not feel the same from the inside. From the inside it felt like a man who has been breathing carefully in a small room for a very long time walking out into clean air. Before this court and before these witnesses, I named Senna of no recorded territory, and no standing the court yet recognizes as the fated mate of the Alpha King of Velroth, confirmed by the mark and confirmed by the wolf, who has been wiser than his king for 11 days and arguably for considerably longer. The 3 candidates had composed themselves with the grace of women who understood what had just happened and bore it with dignity. I respected them for it. I would find the right words for them later, and I would mean them. Vareth had composed himself too, with somewhat more visible effort, but he had managed it. He was a good counselor, and the kingdom would have managed without the bond, but he had always known it mattered, and I could see him, beneath the effortful composure, arriving at a particular satisfaction that he was not quite ready to express openly. The ranking families and the eastern lords and the assembled court of Velroth did what courts do when something undeniable has occurred in front of them. They acknowledged it. Not all at once, not with the drama of a performed moment, but the way genuine acknowledgement moves through a room, a shift, a settling, a collective recognition that something has been decided at a level none of them can contest. One by one they bowed. I spent the afternoon in the practical work of formalizing what the morning had made certain. The court documents, the notifications to the Eastern lords, the careful conversations with Vareth, who was, once he had finished composing himself, professionally thorough and personally, I thought, quietly pleased. "The council will need time," he said, which was his way of saying the council would need 2 weeks and would then proceed efficiently. "The ranking families will have questions." "They can ask them," I said. "Senna will answer the one she wants to answer and leave the rest alone, and they'll respect her for it faster than they'd respect anyone I tried to explain." Vareth considered this. "She fixed Bren's patrol wolf injury the night she arrived," he said, which was not a non sequitur if you had been paying attention. "She did. She's been mending equipment in the yard for 11 days without being asked." "Yes." A pause. "She didn't ask for anything," he said. "She had everything she needed," I said, which was what she had told me and which I was only now fully understanding. He left with his documents and his lists and the comfortable industry of a man with a great deal to organize, and I went to find Senna. She was in the east yard. Of course she was. The light was going, the low amber light of a winter afternoon settling into the early dark, and she was at the eastern fence, which was where she had stood the first morning I noticed her, looking at the pine ridge. All 11 wolves were in the yard. They were not arranged dramatically. They were simply present, in the way the yard had been for 11 days, oriented toward her the way things orient toward warmth. I crossed the yard and stood beside her, close enough that our arms nearly touched. She did not step away. "The court has accepted it," I said. "Good," she said, without particular drama. "Vareth will have a great deal of paperwork." "He seems like a man who enjoys paperwork." "He does," I said. "It may be his greatest pleasure in life." She smiled then, the full version, not the not quite one, and it changed her whole face in the way a window changes a room when the light comes through it. I had not seen the full version before. I stood there in the amber light of the east yard, and felt the mate mark warm on my wrist and understood, with the certainty of something that has stopped being provisional and become simply true, that I was going to be looking at that smile for as long as there were pine ridges to look at, and cold winter mornings to sit through, and yards full of wolves who had known before I did. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "When did you know?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the ridge. "The second morning," she said. "When Bren came to stand beside me. Something," she touched her wrist, the inside of it, where her own mark was settling into permanence. "Something felt like coming to the right place. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew the wolves weren't wrong." "They weren't," I said. 400 years, she said, not as a question. She had filed the number that morning in the dark and had not forgotten it. 400 years, I confirmed. She was quiet for another moment. "Do you feel differently?" she asked, not with any particular weight on it, just the honest curiosity of someone who wants to understand. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the stone beneath the ribs settling into a different position, about the study feeling less airless, about the dream of the yard and the pale light and eyes that looked at things directly without performing at them, about sleeping badly for 4 centuries and waking, this morning, with the feeling that something had been decided. "I feel like I've been holding my breath," I said, "for a very long time," and stopped. She nodded once. She understood things the first time you said them and did not need you to say them again, which was one of several things about her I was already grateful for. The last light left the pine ridge. The wolves settled around us in the way they had been settling around her for 11 days, unhurried, definitive, organized by some internal logic that had nothing to do with any command I had given. Bren came to my left side and leaned his considerable weight against my leg, which he had done perhaps twice in 11 years. Dustcoat settled behind us both. The tawny bonded pair chose spots at the fence with the comfortable certainty of animals who have arrived exactly where they planned to be. The court of Velroth had bowed this morning. The ranking families had adjusted. Vareth had his paperwork. The Eastern lords had ridden out with a new understanding of the kingdom they were allied to and the king who ran it. All of that was true, and would remain true and mattered in the ways that things matter when you are responsible for a kingdom and the people in it. But what I was thinking about, standing in the east yard in the last amber of the winter light with my wolf finally awake after 400 years of silence, and the mate mark warm and certain on my wrist, and Senna standing at my side with her face turned toward whatever the dark was going to bring next. What I was thinking about was the morning she had been sitting on the frozen ground in the cold before dawn, doing nothing remarkable. And the world had rearranged itself around her, without asking anyone's permission. 4 centuries is a long time to wait for something. But standing there, I found I could not regret a single year of it. Because she had walked in from the cold on a night when the temperature was savage and the pine ridge was dark, and she had not asked for anything, and she had mended what needed mending and sat with what needed sitting with and been quietly, completely herself. And the wolves had known, and the mark had known, and the part of me that had gone still and silent so long ago that I had stopped listening for it had known too, from the very first morning. Bren sighed against my leg. Senna looked up at the first stars over Velroth. And after 400 years, I stopped listening for the silence, because there was no silence left to listen for.